Hello, friends. Democracy and elections are inseparable, as fair and free elections are essential for a democratic government. Election funding plays a crucial role in safeguarding the integrity of democracy by ensuring equal access to information about candidates and issues, facilitating widespread distribution of voter education materials, and empowering citizens to make informed decisions. Adequate funding also supports the administration and oversight of the electoral process, maintains transparency, prevents fraud or manipulation, and provides resources for poll workers, voting equipment, audits, and non-partisan monitoring. Election funding enables campaigns and political parties to effectively communicate their platforms and policy proposals to the electorate, fostering robust exchange of ideas and informed decision making. Transparent and regulated election funding mechanisms help mitigate the disproportionate influence of wealthy donors or special interests, promoting a more level playing field and preventing the undue sway of moneyed interests. Overall, sufficient and appropriately regulated election funding upholds key democratic principles while balancing various concerns to ensure the integrity of the democratic process. Does the election funding in India adhere to the above parameters? Before we answer this question, let us look at some important democracies where election funding is very much part of the process. In Great Britain, the financing of electoral campaigns is governed by a comprehensive system that combines private contributions, state funding, and regulations. This system aims to balance the need for political parties and candidates to raise funds with the importance of maintaining fairness, transparency, and accountability in the electoral process. Only individuals registered on the UK electoral register, including overseas electors and those leaving bequests, can donate to political parties. This measure ensures that only those with a legitimate stake in the UK electoral process can contribute financially, preventing undue influence from external sources. Most UK registered companies are also permissible donors, subject to certain restrictions and reporting requirements. This provision allows businesses to support political causes and candidates they believe will promote their interests while maintaining transparency and oversight. Great Britain registered political parties and trade unions can receive donations from their members and supporters. These contributions play a crucial role in funding their activities, campaigns, and policy development efforts. State funding in Great Britain is primarily reserved for covering the administrative costs of political parties. This includes expenses such as maintaining party headquarters, paying staff salaries, and organizing internal party activities. By providing financial support for these operational costs, the system aims to level the playing field and ensure that parties have the resources to function effectively. Eligible parties receive a policy development grant to support their policy research and development effort. The grant is calculated based on the number of votes received in the most recent general election with a rate of £3 per vote in Westminster elections and pound 1.50 per vote in developed and European elections. This funding mechanism recognizes the importance of policy development in a healthy democratic process and helps parties engage in evidence based policy making. To encourage grassroots support and broaden political participation, donations up to £1,000 and membership fees to political parties are eligible for income tax relief. This incentive aims to motivate individuals to contribute financially to the parties they support, fostering a more inclusive and diverse funding base. Individual candidates have spending limits during UK parliamentary general elections. These limits vary based on the constituency they contest, ensuring a level playing field among candidates within each constituency. This measure prevents candidates with substantial financial resources from overwhelming their opponents through excessive spending. Party spending is capped at £30,000 per constituency where they field a candidate. This means that if a party contests all 650 UK constituencies, the maximum total spend would be £19.5 million. These limits aim to prevent parties with substantial financial resources from overwhelming the electoral process and creating an uneven playing field. The Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act 2000 was a landmark legislation that established the Electoral Commission, an independent body responsible for overseeing party and election finance in the UK. The Act set accounting requirements for political parties and introduced controls on donations to enhance transparency and accountability in campaign financing. Since then, various inquiries and reports like the Hayden Phillips inquiry and the Committee on Standards in Public Life report have proposed reforms to further increase transparency, control excessive spending, and strengthen the Electoral Commission's powers. These efforts aim to address concerns about money's influence on politics and ensure fairness in the electoral process. Reforms have been proposed to update campaign finance regulations for the digital age, addressing issues such as online advertising, micro targeting, and social media use in political campaigns. As campaigning methods evolve, regulations must adapt to maintain integrity and prevent exploiting new technologies for undue influence. Ongoing debates and discussions center around political reforms to increase transparency, limit wealthy donors' influence, and further strengthen oversight mechanisms to maintain public trust in the electoral process. Great Britain's approach balances private contributions, state funding, and regulatory measures, upholding fairness, transparency, and accountability while providing parties and candidates necessary resources. However, continuous evaluation and adaptation are needed to address emerging challenges and meet a modern democracy's evolving needs. Election funding plays a crucial role in maintaining the integrity and fairness of the democratic process in the United States. At the federal level, campaigns receive funding from individuals, corporations, and political action committees, subject to limits set by the Federal Election Commission. Public financing is also available for qualifying presidential candidates, though eligibility requirements and spending limits apply. The rise of super PACs following the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision has allowed for the raising and spending of unlimited funds to advocate for or against candidates, significantly impacting the campaign finance landscape. At the state and local levels, rules and regulations governing campaign finance vary widely. Campaigns receive contributions from individuals, corporations, and PACs, with occasional federal appropriations provided to help administer elections, upgrading voting systems, and improving election security. However, critics argue that inadequate and inconsistent funding can compromise the integrity of the electoral process. The campaign finance system in the United States faces several challenges and concerns. Campaign spending has grown, with each election cycle surpassing the previous one in terms of total expenditures, raising concerns about the influence of money in politics and the potential for wealthy individuals and organizations to wield disproportionate power. Supreme Court decisions like Citizens United versus FEC, that is in the year 2010, and McCushion versus FEC 2014, have enabled wealthy individuals and entities to spend unlimited amounts on campaigns through PACs, including super PACs, raising concerns about transparency and the influence of dark money from undisclosed or obscured sources. Critics argue that big money dominates US political campaigns, drowning out ordinary Americans' voices and creating an uneven playing field. They contend candidates with substantial financial resources have a significant advantage, potentially undermining fair and representative democracy principles. Public opinion polls suggest most Americans believe preventing large donors from having undue political influence is essential. But many feel this situation persists and there is support for increasing transparency and limiting money's influence in politics. Campaign financing in the United States involves a complex interplay of private contributions, public subsidies, and debates about transparency, fairness, and money's role in the electoral process. As campaign spending rises and court decisions shape the landscape, discussions about campaign finance reform and the need for a more equitable system remain at the forefront of political discourse. In France, the financing of presidential campaigns is subject to a comprehensive set of rules and regulations designed to promote transparency, fairness, and accountability in the electoral process. The system involves a combination of spending limits, government reimbursements, and regulations surrounding private financing. During the first round of the presidential election, candidates are limited to spending a maximum of 16.85 million euros on their campaigns. This cap is intended to level the playing field and prevent excessive spending from distorting the electoral process. The top two candidates from the first round proceed to a second round where they can spend an additional 5.66 million euros, bringing their total campaign expenditure to 22.51 million euros. This additional allowance recognizes the heightened visibility and need for campaigning during the final round. In France, candidates securing over 5% of votes in the first presidential election round can receive up to 8 million euros from the government to reimburse campaign costs, alleviating financial burdens and encouraging diverse participation. Those below 5% are eligible for up to 800,000 euros, acknowledging their efforts. All first round candidates receive 200,000 euros in public funding to kickstart campaigns. For the second round, candidates can be reimbursed up to 10.7 million euros by the state, reflecting increased costs. This reimbursement system aims to level the playing field and facilitate participation in the electoral process. Historically, candidates who spend more fare better in French presidential elections. However, there are exceptions to this trend, and adhering to the established rules and spending limits is crucial. To promote transparency and prevent undue influence, France imposes strict regulations on private financing for presidential campaigns. Individual donations are capped at 4,600 euros, limiting large donors' impact. Cash payments are restricted to 150 euros, promoting trackability and accountability. Candidates must maintain detailed financial records, including donations, expenditures, and funding sources, subject to scrutiny and audits for compliance. The system balances state funding, spending limits, and private financing regulations, aiming for a level playing field, transparency, and preventing excessive wealthy influence. However, it faces ongoing debates and potential reforms as France strives to maintain electoral integrity amid evolving challenges. In the light of above, India has a long way to go for funding of elections. The world's largest democracy faces a complex and often contentious landscape for financing its elections. The system involves a mix of mechanisms. It faces significant challenges that raise crucial questions about transparency, accountability, and the potential for undue influence. Currently, the country is mired in electoral bonds controversy. The Supreme Court has declared these bonds as unconstitutional. Introduced in 2017, electoral bonds became a point of contention for injecting anonymity into political donations. These bearer instruments, similar to banknotes, allow donors to purchase bonds from specified State Bank of India branches. The purchased bonds could then be anonymously deposited in the accounts of eligible political parties. However, this anonymity sparked fierce debate, with critics arguing that it shielded the identity of donors, effectively making them immune to public scrutiny. This, they claimed, fostered an environment where individuals or entities could influence political parties without public accountability. Worse, only the ruling party, through the State Bank of India, has access to information about electoral bond transactions, further diluting the principle of transparency and raising concerns about potential misuse of funds. The debate surrounding electoral bonds has become a focal point in the broader discussion on campaign finance reform, with calls for increased transparency and accountability measures. The Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, or FCRA, of 1976 aimed to regulate foreign contributions to Indian political parties. However, in 2014, the Delhi High Court found two national parties guilty of violating the act by accepting foreign donations. Interestingly, subsequent amendments in 2018 legalized these violations, permitting foreign companies to contribute to Indian political parties. This move has ignited fears of unchecked foreign influence, impacting Indian policies and potentially compromising the sovereignty of the electoral process. Opponents express concern that foreign corporate interests could sway domestic policies and decision making, jeopardizing the integrity and fairness of the democratic system. The Finance Bill of 2017 ushered in changes to the Companies Act 2013, raising concerns about reduced transparency in campaign finance. Previously, only profit making companies could contribute to political parties with a 7.5% cap on their donations. However, the amendments removed these restrictions, allowing loss making companies to donate, thus eliminating the limitation on contribution size. The requirement for companies to disclose disaggregated political donations was abolished. Critics argue that these changes have essentially opened the doors for increased corporate influence on political parties and policy making, raising concerns about potential conflicts of interest and the prioritization of corporate agendas over public interest. The impact of corporate funding on policy decisions in India remains a subject of intense debate. Estimates predict that the BJP could receive an annual donation of a staggering 7,20,407 crore rupees from corporate donors by 2025. This raises concerns about potential conflicts of interest and the disproportionate influence of businesses on the political landscape. Critics argue that excessive reliance on corporate funding could lead to policies that prioritize business interests over public needs, ultimately undermining the principles of a representative democracy. They believe that such a system risks neglecting the needs and aspirations of the public in favor of those deemed beneficial to corporate interests. India's campaign finance system is widely recognized as needing substantial reforms to ensure transparency and accountability. By 2019, estimates suggest that elections in India had become the world's most expensive, with a staggering total expenditure exceeding $8.6 billion. A significant portion of this expenditure is attributed to direct cash payments to voters, raising serious concerns about vote buying and the integrity of the electoral process. To address these issues and level the playing field, the idea of state funding for elections has emerged as a potential solution. Proponents argue that this could curb the influence of wealthy donors and promote greater equality within the electoral process. Advocates of state funding contend that it would ensure a more level playing field, reducing the reliance on private and corporate decisions, which can lead to undue influence and potential conflicts of interest. They argue that public funding would promote greater transparency and accountability while ensuring that all candidates have access to adequate resources to run their campaigns. However, opponents raise concerns about the potential misuse of public funds and the challenge of determining appropriate allocation mechanisms. The Indian election funding system undeniably faces a complex array of challenges. Addressing issues like transparency, foreign influence, and the role of corporate funding is crucial for maintaining a fair and accountable electoral process. While reforms aimed at increasing transparency, limiting foreign influence, and balancing private and public funding are essential, the conversation surrounding finding the right balance remains ongoing. Navigating this labyrinthine system of campaign finance in India requires continued dialogue, robust regulations, and a commitment to upholding the principles of a free, fair, and representative democracy. It is a complex challenge that demands the collective efforts of policymakers, civil society organizations, and the public to safeguard the integrity of the electoral process and ensure that the voices of all citizens are heard and respected.